It was just past midnight when the first unmarked trucks crossed Burkina Faso's northern border. Beneath the cover of a drifting Sahel dust storm, inside those trucks sat men who did not wear uniforms, did not carry flags. Only weapons, silence, and the promise of a brutal payday. They were ex-special forces, recruited from private security networks, paid in offshore bank transfers. Their mission: take down President Ibrahim Traoré before dawn, make it look like an internal mutiny, then vanish back into the desert, leaving foreign fingerprints wiped clean. Inside the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, Traoré's inner circle gathered in a candlelit operations room. Power cuts had been coincidentally triggered citywide by local traitors to help the invaders slip in unnoticed. On a dusty map of the capital, red pins marked probable infiltration routes. Traoré stood at the head of the table. He wasn't shouting, wasn't panicking. He traced a finger slowly along the highway where scouts last saw the trucks. "They think a lion sleeps because the forest is quiet," he said calmly. His voice carried the calm of someone who understood that fear is what feeds coups more than bullets ever can. Diallo, his security chief, cleared his throat. "Mr. President, should we call for international help?" Traoré's eyes hardened like steel under moonlight. "International help?" "They sent them, Diallo." Around the room, his exhausted commanders stiffened. Betrayal had many fathers: foreign investors, angry warlords, rival politicians. "Tonight," Traoré continued, "we hunt the hunters. No alarms, no evacuation. Half the palace guards go home as usual. Let them get close, and then we close the jaws." Outside the palace gates, the city lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. In the shadows, the trucks kept coming, toward a fortress that looked vulnerable but held a predator waiting with patient fury. Under the moonless sky, the trucks had scattered their cargo of mercenaries through alleys and half-finished office blocks. They moved like shadows. Pairs of men in black tactical gear, silenced submachine guns slung tight, night vision goggles reflecting tiny points of stolen starlight. They trusted their client's intelligence. Half the palace guards had gone home for the Eid holiday, leaving nothing but a skeleton crew and an overconfident young president who slept under too much marble and too little protection. They didn't know the man they came to kill was wide awake, watching every footstep. Inside the palace's old underground war bunker, a relic from the Sankara era, Traoré leaned over a flickering monitor. Diallo stood at his side, sweat beading along his hairline. He'd begged the president to evacuate to a safe house in Ouagadougou. Traoré refused. "You think a lion hides in the bush when hyenas come?" he asked, calm as dawn. "We don't run from these men, we bury them." On the screen, ghostly thermal dots crept through the palace perimeter. First breach confirmed. Outside, at a low garden wall, two mercenaries paused, whispering in guttural English. One clicked a code into a portable jammer. Security cameras in that sector died instantly. They lifted themselves over the wall like cats, landing softly on dew-wet grass. Just ahead, the palace's rear servants' entrance stood unguarded, door slightly ajar. It was a trap so perfectly staged it looked suspicious, but greed made them stupid. Inside the palace kitchens, two loyal soldiers in plain clothes crouched behind dry storage barrels. They heard footsteps, a silencer click. One muttered into a throat mic, "Foxes at the hen house." Traoré nodded when the whisper reached his earpiece. He pressed a hidden switch under the operations table. Outside, buried claymores near the garden wall armed themselves with a soft electronic chirp no one heard. Meanwhile, another kill team, led by the scarred ex-colonel, breached a side gate. They slipped down the marble corridor leading to the main audience hall, where they expected Traoré to be sleeping behind a pair of antique mahogany doors. Instead, the room held only an empty chair, a teacup still steaming, and an old transistor radio playing a soldier's love song from decades ago. A heartbeat later, the main hall doors slammed shut by remote locks. Metal rods bolted from inside the walls. The intruders turned, too late. Slots in the ceiling slid open and a dozen palace loyalists in riot armor dropped stun grenades through the vents. In the chaos, the ex-colonel cursed. He finally understood. They weren't hunting a president. They were prey in a cage he had built for them himself. The blast of the first stun grenade ripped through the audience hall, bouncing sound and light off century-old marble. The mercenaries staggered, blinded by a white flash, ears ringing like church bells struck with hammers. One dropped his silenced rifle, scrambling for cover behind a velvet-draped sofa. But the antique furniture offered no shelter against what came next. Through hidden side doors, Traoré's loyalists poured in. Young soldiers, some barely older than recruits, armed with old AKs but burning with a kind of loyalty no money could buy. They fired warning shots into the ceiling, shouting commands in French and more. Hands rose. The mercenaries cursed in a dozen foreign tongues. The ex-colonel tried to rally them, but the hallway behind them had already sealed tight. There was nowhere to retreat. In the war bunker below, Traoré watched calmly. Diallo, still tense, whispered, "They're trapped." "Should we finish it now?" Traoré didn't answer immediately. He picked up a dusty field phone, a relic from the revolutionary days, and called the palace kitchens. A young corporal answered with shaky breath, still crouched behind the flour sacks. "Corporal," Traoré said evenly, "bring in the foxes from the garden wall alive. Tell them their death was too cheap a price." Above, in the dark gardens, another claymore detonated with a muffled roar. 2 mercenaries fell instantly. The rest threw down their weapons as more loyalists emerged from the shadows, flashlights cutting through the smoke like knives. Within minutes, the entire strike team, 28 men flown in under fake tourist visas, armed with top-tier gear, knelt zip-tied and bleeding from cuts and bruises in the back courtyard where palace staff used to sip tea under mango trees. The same staff now watched silently from windows, faces unreadable. Inside, Traoré finally left the bunker. He walked alone up the stone stairs and stepped into the ruined audience hall. His boots crunched over broken plaster. He looked at the ex-colonel who was forced to kneel at gunpoint. Traoré's eyes were cold stars. He asked softly, "Who paid you?" The ex-colonel, bruised and breathing heavily, spat blood on the marble and laughed a hoarse laugh. "You think you win tonight, Lion? You've only made bigger men angry." Traoré crouched to his eye level, voice so low it forced silence across the hall. "Tell your bigger men," he said. "Burkina Faso is not for sale, and neither am I." Outside, the first hints of dawn broke the night, and the hunters realized too late they'd entered a trap woven by a man who knew fear and refused to wear it. By the time the sun pushed its first pale light over Ouagadougou, the palace courtyard looked like a battlefield-turned courtroom. The captured mercenaries sat on their knees in 2 neat rows, wrists bound, guarded by young soldiers whose eyes burned with a strange mix of fear and fierce pride. President Traoré stepped into the open, flanked by Diallo and 3 veteran commanders who had once served under old regimes, but now swore loyalty only to him. His boots left dark prints on the wet flagstones still damp from the night's chaos. He didn't speak to the mercenaries first. Instead, he faced the circle of his own men, cooks, drivers, janitors, low-ranking guards, who'd risked everything by staying when it would have been safer to run. He raised his voice so even the traitors in the back garden could hear. "Last night," he began, his words calm, rolling out in French before he switched to Moor for the villagers watching from the palace gates. "These men came to sell your country piece by piece. They brought foreign money and foreign death, but they forgot one thing." He paused, sweeping his eyes across the courtyard. The soldiers leaned closer. The kitchen staff clutched each other's shoulders. Even the mercenaries lifted their heads, drawn in by the gravity of his tone. They forgot this land is not for sale, not to kings, not to presidents, not to mercenaries who think Africa is still a hunting ground for outsiders. A murmur of approval rolled through the crowd. Traoré turned and finally locked eyes with the scarred ex-colonel, who squinted under the morning glare but refused to look away. The president stepped closer, so close the mercenary could smell the desert sweat still clinging to Traoré's uniform. "You owe me answers, Colonel." A thin smile cracked through the ex-colonel's bruised lips. "You think I'll talk for free?" Traoré gave a signal. A young corporal dragged forward a black duffel bag, zipped open to reveal stacks of crisp American dollars labeled in neat bundles. The mercenary flinched. It was part of his advance payment, now repossessed from a traitorous politician's hidden safe. "Talk," Traoré said evenly, "and you live to spend this somewhere far from my soil. Lie, and the worms feed you by sunset." The courtyard fell silent. Birds landed on the palace wall, oblivious to the blood and betrayal below. The mercenary weighed his options. Death here or a deal with the devil who'd hunted him better than any Western contractor. Finally, he rasped a name. A minister still seated comfortably in the National Assembly, wearing a patriot smile in public, but passing coordinates to foreign bidders behind closed doors. Gasps rippled through the loyalists. Traoré didn't flinch. He simply nodded once. "Take him," he ordered, "and burn every root this treason grew from." Above the courtyard, the rising sun caught the red of the national flag. Beneath it, Burkina Faso's young lion made it clear. Betrayal would not be a profitable business, not anymore. Word spread like brush fire. Before noon, rumors of the failed hit squad and the minister's betrayal had slipped through the palace walls. By early afternoon, crowds gathered outside the National Assembly building. Ordinary people, farmers, market women, students, demanded answers. Who else had sold their country's pride for bribes? Inside a dim conference room, Minister Savadogo, the man named by the captured mercenary, sat frozen in his leather chair. His aides whispered about escape routes, safe houses, the embassy down the street that might offer him sanctuary. But none of them knew the door behind him had already unlocked. President Traoré's security chief Diallo walked in alone. No guards, no lawyers. He carried no gun, he didn't need one. His calm face was threat enough. "Mr. Minister," Diallo said evenly, pulling out a chair opposite the traitor, "we can do this two ways." Savadogo tried to stand, but Diallo raised one hand, palm flat. "Sit. Tonight you're going to explain on live television exactly how much they paid you, who gave you the map, and how you planned to vanish while our people died." Sweat dripped from Savadogo's temple. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Outside, the chants grew louder. Some called for arrest, others for something older, sharper, justice the old-fashioned way. Traoré had promised he'd rebuild the nation's honor. Now everyone wanted to see if he meant it. Back in the palace courtyard, the mercenaries were loaded into armored trucks bound for military detention. The ex-colonel glanced back one last time at the baobab tree under which Traoré had prayed before the battle. Even a killer for hire could sense that this president was a breed he'd never met before. In his private chamber, Traoré washed the sweat and dust from his face. He knew tonight's broadcast would seal more than one man's fate. It would show the continent that betrayal might still be possible, but escaping its consequences would no longer be part of the deal. Night fell again, and with it came a hush across Ouagadougou. At 9 p.m., every cafe TV, every old radio set, and every flickering phone screen tuned in to one thing: President Traoré's emergency address. Inside the palace's simple broadcast room, bright studio lights glared down on a modest wooden desk. Behind it, Traoré sat in his olive uniform. No medals, no gold braid, just the nation's flag draped beside him. To his right, a single guest chair held Minister Savadogo, pale and trembling under the lights. Traoré's voice cut through the silence. "Brothers and sisters of Burkina Faso, tonight you deserve the truth." He turned to Savadogo. The traitor could barely lift his eyes. "Tell them who paid you," Traoré commanded, not as a question but a verdict. Live in front of millions, Savadogo stammered names: foreign contractors, oil companies, a few Western advisors who offered new cars and offshore accounts for a simple trade, a map, a schedule, a window of weakness. Every detail spilled into the open, poisonous secrets finally dragged into daylight. Across the country, villagers who'd never seen the capital city clenched their fists in village squares. Taxi drivers honked horns. Students cheered, old women wept. They hadn't heard words like these since Sankara's revolution. When Savadogo fell silent, Traoré faced the camera directly. "My promise was simple," he said. "This land feeds our children. Our gold, our soil, our future, none of it is for sale. And anyone who sells it will answer to you, not to me alone." He didn't bang the table. He didn't shout. His steady tone hit harder than any rifle. Outside the palace walls, where once the city might have burned in chaos, crowds now lit candles and sang old independence songs. No riots, no looting, only a people reminded that dignity could be defended by a leader who did not flinch. Back in the broadcast room, Traoré leaned back, eyes heavy. This victory wasn't the end. He knew new enemies would come. But tonight, he'd shown them something they'd forgotten. A lion may sleep under African stars, but it never bows to wolves in suits. The day after the broadcast, the streets of Ouagadougou buzzed like a beehive stirred awake. Markets reopened. Children returned to school, but everywhere, from dusty cafes to government ministries, people whispered the same name, Traoré. In Europe's diplomatic halls, a different conversation burned. Emails flew between embassies and private consultants. How did he survive? Who leaked the plan? Who will clean up this embarrassment? Traoré anticipated this panic. By mid-morning, he sat in the palace's old war room. Same cracked tiles, same bullet holes from a coup 30 years before. Around him, advisors and senior military officers crowded in, faces a mix of pride and unease. He slammed a folder down. Inside, copies of bank transfers, recordings of the mercenary leader's confession, and documents showing whose hands had been deep in Burkina Faso's pockets for decades. "I want these leaked," he said. "Not just here, to every journalist in Africa. They must see who calls themselves our friends." One minister swallowed hard. "Mr. President, exposing foreign partners may—" Traoré cut him off with a single look. "Partners don't send assassins. If they panic now, good. Let them wonder what else I know." Outside, armored vehicles rolled slowly through the capital, not to threaten the people, but to reassure them. Tonight, no mercenary convoy would come unnoticed again. At the same time, a convoy of captured traitors, including Savadogo, was escorted to a high-security prison. Traoré made sure the media filmed every step. No secret trial, no discreet exile. Betrayal would be public, ugly, unforgettable. In a private moment, Diallo approached Traoré at the palace gates. "Sir, you've made powerful enemies. They won't stop." Traoré stared beyond the gates where crowds still chanted his name. "I know," he said quietly. "Let them come. Every bullet they buy for me is one less they spend buying my people's silence." He turned back toward the palace, the morning sun rising at his back. Somewhere beyond the horizon, other presidents watched, wondering if they too might soon stand where he did, alone but unbroken. Tonight the puppeteers would dream restless dreams. The lion had roared, and the echoes were only beginning. In the days that followed, Burkina Faso's capital buzzed with an energy the old men of politics hadn't felt since the Sankara era. Young people painted murals of Traoré on concrete walls. Some showed him as a lion, others as a farmer planting seeds in red earth. It wasn't just admiration, it was a message to anyone else dreaming of selling their future. But far beyond Ouagadougou, the real aftershock hit harder. Across West Africa, radio talk shows crackled with debates. Could a president really fight back? Could betrayal really fail for once? In Ghana, a group of university students staged a sit-in, demanding their own leaders reveal foreign mining contracts. In Mali, a local commander sent a quiet word to Traoré's office. "Your fight is our fight, brother. Say the word and we stand beside you." Inside his private study, Traoré read stacks of letters by candlelight. Some were from village elders, thanking him for showing young men how to die for something other than someone else's profit. Others were threats, typed warnings from lawyers in Paris and London. Cancel your leak or face lawsuits, sanctions, embargoes. Traoré dropped the letters into the fireplace one by one, watching the paper curl to black ash. He didn't ignore the risk. He summoned trusted economists, local business owners, farmers' cooperatives, not to plan more speeches, but to design how to survive if aid money disappeared overnight. "If they block our ports, we grow double. If they freeze our accounts, we trade in grain, not dollars," he told them. "Freedom costs more than gold, but we pay it once, then our children never have to." Meanwhile, traitors abroad plotted a second strike, more discreet than mercenaries, a whispered plan to sabotage grain stores, to spark food riots that would stain Traoré's promise with hunger. But the young president was no fool. He called up village chiefs, tasked loyal captains to guard supply routes personally. For every shadow moving in back alleys, a pair of loyal eyes watched from a rooftop. And deep down, even the worst foreign plotters began to whisper what they feared most. This man was not a puppet. This was a lion teaching cubs to roar back. The second plot unfolded under moonless skies. In a dusty granary on the edge of Ouagadougou, 3 masked men cut the lock on a warehouse holding thousands of sacks of millet and maize, the backbone of Traoré's food security plan. Their orders were simple: burn it all, blame the government, starve the people back into begging for foreign aid. But these men didn't know Traoré had been waiting. He had learned. Power isn't kept by trusting guards in shiny uniforms. It's held by trusting the market woman, the taxi driver, the old night watchman who has seen every coup and rumor. As the first match flared, a low whistle cut through the dark. In seconds, hidden soldiers circled the warehouse. The saboteurs tried to flee through the back, but stumbled straight into the calloused hands of neighborhood farmers who'd traded sleep for patrol shifts. Minutes later, Traoré himself arrived at the scene. No convoy, no armored car, just a battered pickup and Diallo at his side. He climbed the storage ramp and looked down at the captured men, their faces pressed to the dirt. One saboteur spat curses in a European accent. The other 2 stayed silent, knowing their fate was sealed. Traoré turned to the farmers and young soldiers surrounding them. He spoke not in French, but in Moor, the language of the land. "These men thought your hunger would weaken you. They thought setting fire to your harvest would burn your faith in each other. They thought wrong." He knelt by the main saboteur, lifted his chin with rough fingers. "Tell your masters," Traoré said, voice low but every word clear, "every bag of grain you tried to destroy will feed a family for weeks. Every scheme you send will teach my people how to defend themselves without fear." He stood, signaling for Diallo to take the traitors away. Overhead, dawn cracked the horizon, brushing the warehouse roof with gold. Villagers gathered silently, some with torches ready to fight the next fire. In that soft light, they saw no crown on Traoré's head, no throne under his feet, just a man standing between them and the wolves. And that, they realized, was enough to make him a king worth keeping. A week after the foiled sabotage, Burkina Faso felt like a country reborn. Markets bustled louder than before, not because people suddenly got rich, but because they trusted that the food they traded and the gold they mined would not vanish into foreign bank accounts overnight. At dawn prayers, elders whispered that the land itself seemed calmer, as if the ancestors approved of this young man's defiance. In the capital, foreign journalists begged for interviews. Some hoped to catch Traoré slipping, maybe a crack in his promises, a sign he would buckle under sanctions and threats. But when they came to the palace gates, they found no lavish press room, just a simple courtyard where Traoré, in dusty boots, spoke with farmers, students, and mothers whose husbands once dug gold for pennies. One morning, a Western reporter asked him, "Mr. President, aren't you afraid? They might try again, another coup, Another bullet. Traoré smiled. Not the smile of a politician, but the weary, amused grin of a farmer who knows the weather may turn cruel, but plants his seeds anyway. Fear is for men who own nothing worth dying for, he said. I own nothing except my people's trust, and they own me. Meanwhile, Diallo and the loyal officers swept out the last pockets of corruption. 2 more traitorous officials fled to Europe, but found no red carpets waiting, only frozen bank accounts and whispered disgrace. On the border, young captains forged new trade routes with neighbors equally hungry for independence. Small caravans replaced foreign aid trucks, grain flowed south, gold stayed home. Traoré rarely slept more than 4 hours now. Nights he spent walking the palace grounds, greeting the old guards, checking the kitchens, not because he feared poison or betrayal, but because every stone, every wall, every mango tree reminded him this was not his to rule, but to protect. One evening, as the harmattan wind blew dry leaves through the courtyard, Diallo found him leaning on the old stone balustrade. "You won tonight, Ibrahim," Diallo said softly. "But you know they will come again." Traoré nodded. "Then let them. They will find me here, and when I fall, they will find 10 more lions waiting." He glanced up at the stars, the same sky Sankara once looked upon, dreaming of an Africa free from masters. And in that quiet night, one truth rang clear: a lion does not guard the land alone. It teaches the cubs to roar. My friends, what you have just witnessed is not just a tale of one man, but a lesson for every corner of Africa and beyond. Traoré's fight was never only against mercenaries, traitors, or foreign puppeteers. It was against fear itself. Fear that says our gold must be sold cheap, our leaders must bow low, our hopes must be borrowed and repaid with interest. But tonight, we see a different ending. A people who stand watch over their harvest. A president who walks his palace at midnight, not to hide from threats, but to remind every stone and every child, this land is ours, and no one sells what ancestors paid for in blood and sweat. May this story remind us that betrayal may come at night, but dawn belongs to the brave. And in every village, in every market, in every young mind learning to dream, there lives a lion ready to roar when it must. Thank you for watching The Untold State. Subscribe for more untold truths. And never forget, history favors those who stand up even when the world says, kneel.